Welcome to season 3 of Brief Belief. It seems a little hard to believe that we started this a little over 2.5 years ago. When I originally came up with the concept for this podcast, I was not sure if we would get our team of specialists together and do the justice that we wanted to do for our listeners. But I am proud to say we have. Grief is not always about the loss of a loved one. In fact, there are so many intangible griefs that we experience. There's no right way or wrong way. It's an individual path. And it's important that we understand that we will all travel this path in life. It's unavoidable. Today, Kristy Anderson will introduce us to our special guest, Dee Dee Starks. We welcome you to connect with us after the podcast, share your thoughts. Our panel is always available to respond to you without judgment. Kristy, thanks for bringing us our guests and tell us a little bit about her.
Yes. Okay. So, first of all, I can't believe we're starting our third year. Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. Um, and I am thrilled to have Dee Dee with us today. Dee Dee, so let me start this way. I have always wanted to have a hospice nurse on our show. I feel like we are all going to, like you just said, we are all going to experience loss. And I feel like almost everybody is somehow at some point in their life going to be touched by hospice, whether it's directly, a loved one that's very close to you or a friend or somehow. And I think there's a lot of confusion around hospice. So I've always wanted to have a hospice nurse on. And I recently reconnected with Dee Dee. So give you a little background. Dee Dee, when we moved into our home, Dee Dee's family lived right next door. They still live right next door. Dee Dee has grown up and moved on, but her mom still lives there. We love her mom, and we loved the whole family. They were just wonderful neighbors. And so Dee Dee kind of just grew up right next door to us. And recently, we were at her mom's house. It was for graduation for one of your accomplishments.
Yeah, yeah.
And started talking to Dee Dee. And when I heard her heart about her job, the way she feels about it, I was like, oh, I want her. I want her on our show. So that's how this all came about with having Dee Dee on. I am going to kind of let Dee Dee explain her background and how she ended up where she is. But I do want to tell you that Dee Dee has had 17, she's so young. I don't know how this is possible. 17 years experience as a nurse, with the majority of that being home care for quadriplegics and hospice care. So Dee Dee, welcome. We're
Thank
so
you.
excited to have you here. And she truly, I mean, she is just has a heart of gold. I just really admire you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to ask you, and this could kind of go, it's almost two questions, but it might be one. So however you answer it is fine. But I wanted to ask you if there were any life events or a life event that happened that made you go, hey, I want to be a hospice nurse. And the
Yeah.
second part to that,
Okay.
the second part to that is, what was your journey to becoming a hospice nurse? So I didn't know if those might be two separate questions or if those kind of intertwine.
I think they basically intertwine. Obviously, a lot of it has to do with my own personal grief. And I do want to be very honest with the specific griefs that I encountered. So it did start when I was about 15. My best friend at the time, her brother was stabbed to death. And I was kind of thrusted into the middle of it because I was sleeping over her house. Her uncles came, picked us up. They were running red lights. We went to the hospital, and I just watched this whole family just lose a piece of them. I can see her dad telling her that her brother's gone, and my friend screamed at the top of her lungs. And we're only 15 at the time, you know what I mean? And you're never actually prepared to lose somebody, no matter how much you know about grief or what you've been through. it hit something different that I feel like people really can't describe unless you know what it feels like. So moving forward from that, they had a trial. There was just all this stuff that was going on, and then watching her and her family try to piece things together, but they seem to just continuously fall apart. And I know that happens a lot with families. And I got a little bit older, and my best friend, she killed herself. And I actually watched her die, and I was about 20 years old. Um, there's nothing I feel that would prepare anybody for something like that. You know what I'm saying? And within a 6 month period after that, so my best friend, she died in June. August was her birthday. And she had left photos and stuff. And so I had this 8x10 photo that she had said she wanted me to give to one of our other childhood friends. And I went to the liquor store because that's how I coped. I drank a lot of whiskey. And as I was at the store, that friend was actually walking out. So I had told him, I was like, oh my gosh, I have this photo Amanda left for you. He's like, drop it off over at the house. I'm like, all right, fine. 2 days later, he ended up dying. So he got run over by the train in Berea. And I won't go too much into that, but then now I have this 8x10 photo of two people that I've grown up with that are now gone within, a couple months. And then December hit, and my other best friend died in a house fire with his girlfriend. So within 6 months, and these weren't people like I would just see around. Like, I'm having sleepovers. Like, I'm with them every single day. I'm growing with these people. Like, they were serious parts of my life. And within 6 months, they were all gone. And like I said, there's nothing that can prepare you to understand that. My coping took a hard left because how do you know how to cope? You know what I'm saying? Like when that was happening, and even now it's still, it's such a dark journey sometimes. And I won't give the whole list, but there's so many other people that I love so much that passed away, to where I started thinking, like, don't become my friend because you're gonna die and I can't handle that. And I want you to stay alive. Like, these are like legit things that were going on in my head. I was telling Karen that I was working at a nursing home as an STNA, and it was night shift, and I was doing my rounds or whatever, and this little old lady, she didn't look right to me, and I didn't have much of a medical background, and I remember going and telling the nurse, like, hey, I think you should come check her out. And he had walked into the room and he was like, oh, she's dying, call me when she's dead, and then just walked out of the room. And I'm like, what? You know what I'm saying? Like, what do you do with that? And like, I just kind of froze, but I couldn't leave her. Didn't know her, but she didn't have any family. She didn't have anybody there. And even if she did, they weren't going to make it there in time. You know what I'm saying? And so I sat with her, and to sit with essentially this stranger, and try to just give as much presence as my little body knew how to give at the time, you know what I mean? Until she passed away. And it was after that where it kind of started pointing me in the direction of, I don't ever want to be so disconnected to where I say to somebody, let me know when they're dead, and just walk out of a room. Like, like, that's somebody's mother. That could be somebody's, sister, somebody's best friend. Like, that is somebody to somebody else, whether you have the connection or not. And it broke my heart. It broke my heart, that there's a lot of healthcare providers that have just kind of cut that form of compassion off, or never had it. Who knows? So after that, that kind of started pointing me in the direction of hospice. So at least I knew that there was going to be one person out there that was going to come with all the love, all the respect, everything that I could, that people do need in such a vulnerable situation. So I mean, there's a lot, that pieces into it. But those are some of the ones that kind of like stick in me for a little bit longer.
You also talked about how you ended up like your training, and how does that play in? You know, you worked with a lot of quadriplegics. How does that play into your story and your journey?
Um, so I mean, it gives you even that. I mean, aside from hospice, will give you a completely different outlook on life because I am watching people die repetitively. Sometimes, I mean, in one 12-hour shift, I had 5 people that died. 2 were already dead by the time I got there, and 3 died after I arrived. That's one shift out of like 8 something years. You know what I'm saying? But working home care with the quadriplegics that I took care of, it puts a lot more in perspective of things that we take for granted. And it's like the tiniest things, like if you have a scratch on your forehead, try to not scratch the scratch. You know, I try to put myself in somebody else's situation. That's literally like torture. If you have a little tickle and to not be able to even scratch your own face and have to call for somebody and wait for however long they decide, you know, are they going to move fast or are they going to move slow because they're tired? You know what I'm saying? Like there's so many factors and there's so many people that live like that, you know, and who am I to be like I'm having a bad day, but I can move. You know, I can hug somebody I love. I can pick up the phone. I can go for a walk. I can do all these things even with my bad days. So, you know, that just started opening up a different perspective in life in general. And you know, and hearing the things that they say, like days they wake up and they wish that they didn't, you know? And even with grief, people wake up and wish that they didn't so they could be with that person that they lost, is because they cannot imagine a life without them. Like there's just so many things that connect it. You know, and it just kept pushing me more towards what can I do with what I've seen, with all the poor decisions that I made. Like I said, I took a dark road when it came to grieving. I did all the wrong things, all of them. And I was telling Karen, life is gonna move with or without you. Whether you're running with it or you're getting drugged from behind, it's still going to keep going. So it just kind of turned into, how can I take all my pain and how can I take all these things that were traumatizing and just all these nasty things that I saw I was a part of. Yes.
So my husband died at home in my arms. So I have some, not your level of experience, but that happened. And it was the hardest and most incredible experience of my life.
Mhm.
Um, and we had hospice coming to the home at the end. But I kept being pushed to put him into hospice,
Mm.
which wasn't what I wanted, what he wanted. And so I fought very hard, and we wound up with the ending that we wanted. Could you talk about the difference between being able to be at home and being in a setting like a hospice or a place like
Like
that?
as the medical professional, or I mean, there's a big difference. And you are amongst so many others that feel the same way. I would feel that way. I don't want to be in a hospital, is because when you're in that different environment, I do feel like it takes a lot away from it. You know what I mean? Like it just makes your
Mhm.
environment just so different. It's not as personal. You know, I think people feel more like a room number as opposed to the actual individual. And people don't want, that's not where they want to end their life. They want to see their wife holding them before they pass away. They want to see the cat jump off the counter one more time. They want to, you know what I mean? Like there's so much more of a send off to wherever, being at home, you know, that it's then being in a facility. And nothing wrong with facilities, because there are some people that refuse to die at home and want to be at a facilities because they don't want their family to remember that in their home. So I think that also pairs with, there's so many different forms of the way that people grieve, and anticipatory grief has a lot to do with where they end up, because everybody's waiting for that inevitable that they cannot stop, they can't do anything about. So they start forgetting about the now, and they're looking at, well, what's going to happen when he or she does this? You know what I mean? Am I going to need a nurse, or am I going to need to be in that environment? So there's a lot of different aspects that go with it. So it does just come with, personally, I think, what people need. I would prefer to be in the home setting. It makes it more personal, and I feel like people fight a battle like you did of, this is what we want. You know what I mean? So the way
Yeah.
that I look at it is how can I help this person get what they need, provide the support that they need for what they choose for their life. You know what I mean? Like, to force somebody to go somewhere else if they want to pass away at home, like, who is that person to tell them that they can't do that? It's your
Right.
life. You know what I'm saying? So, I mean, number one, good for you for fighting for that and for staying home. That's also not an easy thing to do, especially with anticipatory grief. Um, but yeah, being in the home makes it way more intimate, more personal, and I do feel can be better for the patients and the families.
So I have one more straight up question. How do you know when it's time to set up hospice? So I'm asking specifically, I care for my late husband's mom,
Mhm,
who's now 101,
mhm,
still lives in her apartment. What we can afford is about 4 or 5 hours of care a day,
mhm.
and she can walk around, she can play the piano. Um, but I don't have hospice set up. At what point do you know, okay, it's time to have that net?
The first thing that pops into my head is, what is the quality of life? Hospice, I think a lot of people just think about the medications and death, but there's so much more that's in the middle of that. Quality of life is one of the biggest parts of it, is because one of the hardest things of being a hospice nurse is not the patients dying, it's the families. It's the families, and it's the dynamic that they have around them, is because I feel that a lot of people are just feeling what they feel, and they're doing what they need because they're going to miss that person, but it's not what's best for the patient. So the quality of life, I think, would be, I mean, if she's getting around, if she's safe, I mean, let her rock it out until she can't, but 4 hours of care is not a lot. Knowing what it's like to be a caregiver, 4 hours of care is not a lot. And, when you start to get to that point of just being able to make it to certain stations in the house where you sit for however long until you make it to the next one, um, I think it also depends on what she wants. Does she want to be at home? Because she also has the right to stay at home until, unfortunately, she may fall. Something might, she may get very, very hurt, and then that will take her life in a specific direction. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
no, she wants to stay at home. She's safe.
mhm,
She has a med alert,
mhm.
but when she presses it, her idea of emergency, she spilled milk on the
Yeah,
kitchen floor
yeah.
and she
She's
pressed a
not
help
alone with
button.
that. She has a community that does that. So,
So, I mean, but then they talk to her, hey, are you okay? And it's like this voice in the room, and she doesn't actually know what's going on, so she doesn't answer.
yeah,
And so the EMTs come,
yeah,
and then they help her back into bed.
yeah.
But, it's a puzzlement.
It is. Is. And with hospice, though, you have to have a terminal diagnosis. So not just anybody can hop onto hospice because they're old and having a hard time getting around. A lot of it has to do with, typically it's 6 months or less to live. So you have to have some kind of terminal diagnosis that, a doctor or somebody had said, we think it's only going to be this far along, as opposed to palliative care is where you have a serious illness or a decline, but you're still able to do treatments, and you can pursue whatever you need in order to kind of prolong things or to keep you comfortable. So there is a difference of, it doesn't even sound like she needs hospice. If she's still, kind of moving and grooving at home, I think it just sounds like caregivers. It would be a caregiver thing. Like I wouldn't even, assume that
She'll be
she
102 on May 5th.
good for her.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And to be home.
Yep.
So that's pretty amazing. But I would say that
Okay, so don't worry about hospice for her at this point.
no, because if she, is she sick? I mean, are there other medical things
She
or is
gets
it just,
colds. She takes
yeah,
one medication.
yeah,
She's like healthier than 9/10 of the people I know.
yeah, no, I mean, my personal opinion is that's just more of a, how do we find enough help to keep an eye on her or something like that to help her with things as opposed to hospice because I also think that there's a lot of situations, and just from my personal experience as a hospice nurse, we are secondary care. We are not the primary caregivers. It may feel like it
Right.
at times because we'll provide support and education and things like that, and we will show up, or at least I will. But there has to be a primary caregiver that's not us that's able to do all those things. So even if it was hospice, unfortunately, the families still have to try to figure out how are we going to care for this person? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Because if it's just you, say it's just you, that's very hard on one person or two people taking turns. Like there's a lot that goes into being a caregiver. And I don't think a lot of people realize it unless they're the actual caregiver, because a lot of outside family members like to pop in every 2 months or something and then give you a list of all the things that you should do as the caregiver and then leave.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's me and one other. So yes, exactly. I've
Kristina,
been
did you?
asking lots of questions. I hope they're helpful to our audience.
Yeah, ask away.
So I had a question, because I don't know too much about hospice. So as a hospice nurse, are you providing care, but also like providing resources and support? What does your like day-to-day kind of look like?
So I guess it kind of, because I was cross-trained in a lot of different positions with the hospice company that I work for. So triage, which is all the telephone calls that come in after hours. But typically, so if somebody signs on to hospice, you are given a primary team. So with that primary team, you have a social worker, you have a registered nurse, spiritual care if you want it, and an aide that can come help and do, day-to-day things, help shower, bathe somebody. I worked on call for many years on night shift, and on call visits are outside of the primary team. Primary team is basically 8 a.m. to like 4 or 5 p.m., give or take if they have to stay later for something. So if that patient needs something, they would call their primary team. And if they need a visit or had questions or something, then that primary team would try their best in order to kind of guide them in that direction. So I guess it just kind of depends on what time of the day it is. Is it nighttime? Is it daytime? But for an on-call nurse, if there's an issue and your health and problems don't stop at 5 p.m. So 3 o'clock in the morning, you have a loved one that's having difficulty breathing. You would call the after hours and they would dispatch an on-call nurse. That nurse, me, I would show up and I would try symptom management. So I would do non-farm interventions, so nothing that had to do with medications or anything, repositioning or just any little tricks I can do to sit somebody up or whatever that somebody may not know could be helpful in that situation. And then it also resorts to, okay, well, these are the medications that we have on board, is because, like I said, it's all about quality of life and keeping somebody comfortable during that process of decline. So then I would call a doctor over the phone, give the description and the report of everything that's going on and get different orders if I needed to, different medications. They would mail medications to the house. So I guess it just kind of, like I said, it depends on the day and what that person actually needs. Sometimes it's just a phone call, so I would work triage. Sometimes they just need education on meds. So there's just so many different facets to it. It's kind of hard to it's kind of hard to explain the whole picture for me personally. Sorry.
So I have a question, just to be very clear, because I think people get really confused about what hospice is and what palliative care is. So can you, I know you kind of went over that, but can you go over that a little more in detail so we can see the difference between whether someone may need palliative care versus hospice?
So one of the biggest differences is hospice, like I had said, you have to have a terminal diagnosis within a specific amount of time. Like, and typically, like I said, it was 6 months or less. So whether the cancer, there's no more treatments that are available to you. It's sometimes it's not even a choice. It's just the situation that that person ends up in. There's no more treatments. There's nothing else that we can do for you other than keep you as comfortable as we can until you die. And but there's also people still get sick and they still get cancer and they have all these serious illnesses. Palliative can come in with comfort care, education, and support at any stage of that illness. It doesn't have to be right at the end. Hospice is only end of life. There's no treatments anymore. We're not doing labs. We're not doing any scans. We're not doing any of that anymore. Because at the end of the day, if you get that x-ray or if you get those labs, there's nothing that they're going to be able to do about it. So one of the biggest things is the timing and if somebody is still or able to even pursue active treatments to try to help cure what's going on. So yeah, it's the stage that somebody may be in. So if there's no more options or they don't want any more options and they're like, enough is enough, is because it comes back to quality of life. You do all this chemo, you go through all these things. And some of that has to do with that patient not wanting to put their family, through some, trying to hang on for them. But for the last year of their life, they're sick and they're way more miserable than they would have been if they weren't doing all the chemo or the radiation or, all these treatments of whatever. So a lot of it has to do with the timing and if they still want to put up that fight.
So Dee Dee, also, I have heard, and I don't know if this is true or not, but if you are on hospice care, so for instance, let's say you have somebody who just says, I'm done with cancer treatment. I don't want any more chemo. I'm just done with that. So they go on hospice. If they suddenly go, you know what? I actually changed my mind. I want treatment. Can they go off hospice care?
Yeah.
Go back to it later.
We've had people do that all the time, because everybody has the right to change their mind. You know what I mean? And I've had hospice patients that are still full codes. That's very confusing to me, going into it being new. I'm like, full code, we got to do everything we're supposed to do in order to keep them alive, but they're on hospice. It was hard for me to see that, but there's a lot of people that don't want to die. And I think people view hospice as everybody's old. I've had babies, I have children, I have people, teens, 20s, like there's no age discrimination when it comes to hospice care. And it's definitely not just elderly people. So
In New York State, if you go on hospice, you're required to have a DNR.
yeah.
Is that a state by state thing? So DNRs do not resuscitate?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that a sort of standard?
I think it goes by state, but it also it depends, because if somebody's in their home, from my experience, if somebody wants to pass away at home or be on hospice, like I said, I've had full codes and they're signed on the hospice because everybody knows there's nothing else that we can do, but that person doesn't want to die. So that's why they keep that code status. They are trying to fight until they can't fight anymore. But if you were to go into one of the inpatient hospice houses or inpatient units, they do require for that patient to be a DNR CC. So I think it's the environment. A lot of it has to do with where you're going and where you plan on passing away, that regards to the code status.
And is there a best place to put the documents that people need, like a hospice team or whatever? So two questions. Like I have it taped over the fridge.
I was gonna say fridge. That's the first thing that popped into my head. Fridge.
And the other thing is, as a hospice team, how does that work? The different elements of the hospice team. So there's the hospice nurse, the social worker, how do you coordinate and interact to help the family and help the person?
Well, just how you said, it's a team. So it kind of just always is going to depend on what's actually happening. People have, like in your situation, it's you and one other person caring for somebody. That's not a lot of help. And that is a lot of work. It's a lot of work because, like I said, somebody's health doesn't just go perfect from 5 p.m. until 8 a.m. the next day. Things happen in the middle of the night. With the team that they put together, social worker, they are able to bring in resources. Now, we can't say, try this home care or, that's a conflict of interest, but we can provide specific resources. A social worker would let somebody know, hey, this is, a home care that will help administer medications, or this is affordable, because a lot of it also has to do, people can't afford it because it's expensive. And the more time that goes by, the more prices, everything goes up, which blows my mind. But, and like I said, if I was the nurse that was at the house, I've called social workers because I'm like, I don't know how to help with that. And a lot of people will pass away and they don't have any money. Nobody has any money. So then what do? You can't afford a funeral home. You can't afford a burial. That's when you call the social worker. They try to work with different resources and can get funds, or at least find a place that would accept, somebody's remains and not charge the same as like a funeral home. So I think it just kind of all depends. But from my experience, it wouldn't work if we didn't have the team. It's because everybody has to bring something different in order for, the chain to stay together. So I don't know if that answered your question at all, but it's everybody has to work together and everybody's coming with something completely different. And even if it was a primary nurse as opposed to an on-call nurse, then on-call nurse doesn't have like that day-to-day, or that, I don't want to say they don't have the connection, but they don't know the person. So an on-call nurse is also able to come in their shoulders back. What can I do for this family? And not have like the memories of last week they were up and walking. You know what I mean? So I think it just depends on your position, but as a team, they all come from different points of view in order to help that patient and their family.
So how do you separate yourself? You're dealing with death.
Mm-hmm.
You're dealing with families sometimes that are getting along, sometimes that are not.
There's a lot that doesn't, I'll tell you that much, which is
Probably
understandable.
more often than not. But at the end of the day, you still have a life. You're still living. You still have friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you come home and now can laugh and have a good time? Whereas during the day, maybe you felt like you were on the verge of tears.
Yeah. So there's been a couple. There's like 3 that stand out to my head to where I broke down after I left. I've never cried in front of, patients or their family members, because I feel like my job is to be strong so everybody else can fall apart. So, and I am like a sponge. So in those environments, I feel like I try to soak up as much of that angst and sadness and whatever as I can, and just exude, as much compassion and love as I can. But I mean, it goes back to my own personal grief and pain. And so it doesn't hit me the same, because it's like, if it was one of my family members that was dying every time I went to work, that would be a whole completely different beast.
Right.
So them being strangers just kind of allows me to have that separation so I can do my job and care for these people. But um, that's also something that I still work on. I never thought that I would need like a therapist or anything. I never thought that I was actually carrying so much of these other people's deaths on my shoulders. Um, nature. I use nature, peace. Um, I honestly, I don't know. I don't really know how to answer that. Because I can't explain a lot of it. It's just more of what I feel. And I've been drawn so much to try and just be that solid rock for somebody because I know it, God, you know what I mean? I mean, I'm sure you all have felt the grief, you know what I'm saying? And to know that somebody is feeling that, you know, but to be the one to be able to just let them, it's going to be okay. One day, not right now, not next week, not even next year. You never know. It depends on somebody's journey, but that gives me enough back to where it doesn't weigh on me that much to know that I can go into somebody's home and they look at me with so much like fear in their eyes, like what is happening? Like, but to be able to tell them, that's just a reflex. That is not pain. That's not suffering. And like to feel like, see him take a breath and be like, okay, that just fills me back up to know I was able to change just that moment right then and there. So I don't know. I've never been one of those people when I would hear people say like, oh, it was meant for this. I'm like, yeah, right. Until I started as a hospice nurse, and it was the first time in my life where I literally felt this is where I'm supposed to be. So, feeling that and knowing that it's not, I love it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so to love something that I do, I don't see all the dark and the heavy that other people may attach to what they think my day to day. And I think when people think of hospice nurse, because people say all the time, oh, I don't know how you do it. Well, like I said, it's not my mom. It's not my mom. It's not my sister. It's not my best friend. People attach their own personal grief to what they think my day is, and it's just something completely different. So.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you would say? I'm certain that we have some viewers who are in this situation, who are family caregivers, who have someone who is, in that situation with hospice or coming close to death. Is there anything that you would say to them about this process of going from life into death?
Um, I would remind them that it is not selfish to take care of themselves. A lot of people carry guilt. If I leave, they're alone, or if I do that. But if you're not taking care of yourself, how are you going to be able to provide any kind of care for somebody else? And that is hard. It is very, very hard. I know that personally to pull yourself away is because even if somebody tells you, oh, go to lunch as soon as you leave, what is that? What is my loved one doing? Did they fall? Are they hungry? Are they sitting up correctly? Like a caregiver brain does not stop no matter where they're located. So I just, and it probably won't work, but I would tell somebody that they need to be gentle with themselves. And I would also tell them that none of this is your fault. You are not doing anything wrong. You are not abandoning somebody. You are not being selfish. You know what I mean? Everybody needs to be honest with what they're actually capable of providing for somebody. I find it more admirable for somebody to be like, I can't do this. That is a very hard thing to acknowledge and say, but one of the best things is because they're acknowledging this is not for me. You know what I mean? And even knowing that to protect, their own heart is a very a major thing. And then, and I had touched on it a little bit. If you are the sole caregiver, there are going to be a lot of people who don't help and do anything that have the need to chime in and try to tell you what you're doing is wrong. what you should be doing, you know what I mean? All either over the phone or that 1 hour visit that they like to do, and then they're going to go back to Florida and enjoy the sunshine while you're sitting there with no sleep for 37 hours, you know what I mean? Trying to clean your loved one up and do all these things. And so I would say for them to also stick their ground. You're the one that's caring for this person, not them. You know what I mean? So you are the one that needs to make those decisions. You are the one that's there watching this person suffer, watching that person's pain. You know, they're not there. They don't see what's happening at 3 o'clock in the morning when, stuff's hitting the fan, excuse me. You know what I mean? Like they're not there. So I would definitely say stick your ground because you're the one that's there. And to don't feel guilty, because a lot of times people think that they have, like I said, you got to take care of yourself. So if you remove yourself, somebody's going to fall, whether you're with them or not with them, and hurt themselves, so I wish I could tell people not to feel so guilty when they want to take that moment for themselves. And also just, those are the two big things. Stick your grounds because you're the one that's there. And
It's the you must, you should. You must, you should.
Mhm.
And then they back you into a corner. You must, you should do this, do that, do the other thing.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking,
and it messes with your
who are
heart.
you changing the commode?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Because I can tell you that's me.
Mhm. Yep.
Yep. And everybody's got an opinion. It's really remarkable to me. They know nothing and they've got an opinion.
Yep. and that happens so much. And also for being an advocate for a patient, I'm going to say that people also need to remind themselves, is what decision I'm making for this person good for their quality of life, or is it because I'm going to miss them or I want them here longer? Because that's also something that needs to be reminded to families and caregivers. You are being affected, and I am so sorry, but are you doing this for you, or are you doing it for them? A lot of people forget it's that anticipatory grief. They want them to be awake longer. They want them to, be talking and eating, and, mama's she needs an IV and all this other stuff. And it's just like, we're not doing that anymore. So you really I'd like to remind people why they're choosing certain routes that they're choosing, if it's for themselves because their heart hurts, or is it actually going to benefit the patient's quality of life? Because 9 times out of 10, a lot of it has to do is because their heart is hurting and they don't want to lose that person.
So I have another question for you. So when you go into hospice, they give you this kit, okay? At least that's what we got.
Comfort care kit, yeah.
And this goes into the refrigerator, and
Yes.
We don't know when you're going to use it, but
Mhm.
then they explain all the different things in there. And I was the one that was designated by my brother that I was going to take care of my mom. Now he was there. He was very supportive, but he could not administer the morphine to her.
Yeah.
And the first time I gave it to her, I saw that it relaxed her. She was fine. I was like, oh, that's quality of life for her.
Mhm.
But I started realizing she needed more and more. And every time I would call into hospice, it was always at night. I'd say, oh, just give her more.
Mhm.
But I had one hospice nurse who said to me, every time you give her morphine, she's 1 inch closer to death. And I took it as I am killing my mother.
No.
And
if I could slap whichever nurse that was.
So it took me a long time to get over that, because right before my mother passed, the night before, she was very agitated. And when we called in, they said, based on her vitals, you have to give her the morphine. And the nurse was very kind that night. And she said, sit with your mother, because your mother doesn't have much longer to go. And she made me comfortable in doing it. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, it's my fault if mom goes the next day, which she did.
Oh, that makes it that that makes me tear up, and it also enrages me at the same time, is because and that's why I carry myself, or at least try to when I'm in somebody's home, is because you can change somebody's entire life with the things that you say. You know what I mean? When I walk into somebody's home, even if I see a trash can, I ask before I do anything, is it okay for me to use that trash can? Is it okay for me to use that sink? You're in somebody's home. And even if it was over the phone, shame on that person, first and foremost. And I am so sorry that somebody said that to you, is because that's not ever going to be something that will go away. You will never get rid of that, no matter how much you've worked and healed and everything. And a lot of that, she needs to be educated, he or she, whoever that is, because there's also this stigma around morphine. And without the education and the correct education and support that you should have gotten, and I'm very sorry for that, is the best way I can explain it for some people to understand is the plane is already going down. That person is declining. You cannot sign on to hospice without knowing that this person is going to die. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So that plane has already started, and it's really hard for people to see that middle part in between. They see the start of it. We signed on to hospice and right before they die. And there's a lot that goes in between, and there's turbulence. Your body's a machine built to survive. Off, and your body's going to keep trying to go. All that morphine or Ativan or whatever medication, Haldol, whatever they're using, that is only there to ease the turbulence. That's all that's doing, is because that plane is already started. You are not killing anybody. And half the time, sometimes the medications don't even work. You know what I'm saying? And terminal restlessness, which a lot of people will get, sometimes, unfortunately, people do not pass away with the birds chirping and the butterflies going in their arms like this and peaceful. For a lot of people, it's not going to look like that. And God, I wish you could give me the name of that person, because I am so.
Oh, we lost her.
Oh dear.
Oh, well, hopefully she can sign back on real quickly before we have to end. But Kristy, what a marvelous guest.
Isn't she amazing? Yes, she is just a delight, and she's perfect for this job. I do think she was born to do it, because she's just got such a heart of gold, and she's just such a pure being. I just adore her. She's wonderful. Yes. So I wonder if she'll be able to hop back on here, or.
Well, we hope so. It looked like her internet was sort of having problems. She was freezing up on there. But
Freezing outside and she's freezing up.
yeah. But I know that I've learned a lot. And I think, Allison, I'm hoping that it helped answer some questions for you as well. Because so many of us, even though hospice is about a person who is dying, I have known people who have gone into hospice, and for whatever reason, they go out of hospice because they are getting better. There's no explanation for it. So, yes, it is for end of life, but there are some, who may rebound. But I think the comfort that we can get from a real good hospice group is very, very important and will help us all through things. So again, Kristy, thank you for bringing Dee Dee on for us today. We will have all this information in our show notes. We will be back again in February. And for those of you who are out on the West Coast grieving over the fires, our hearts are with you. Sadly, I happen to know of two families who have totally lost absolutely everything, and they are helping other grieving families. So sometimes our grief takes us down a new path. Again, have a great day, everybody. And Kristy, make sure that She
She just
knows.
texted me. She said, I don't know what happened. I got kicked out.
Oh, well, tell her that we love her and we'll have to have her back again.
Yeah, I have more questions for her. So yeah, we definitely didn't have enough time with her. So I would love to have her back too.
That'd be great. I'll see you all next month. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.